Our next reader is Margot McMahon. She's an internationally awarded artist, and she's the author of Mac and Irene, a World War II saga, If Trees Could Talk, and YA books Airdrie and Resist, which I know that Resist is nonfiction. I'm sure she could tell you a little bit more about the other one. She comes up here if she'd like. She has worked in the editorial department for Chicago Magazine, World Book Encyclopedia, and Scholastic Magazine. In 2020, her essay, Sculpting Forms of Nature, was published in the Remembering 50 anthology, 50 Years of Women at Yale. In the fifth season, the Chicago Tree Book originated from a paper that was published by MIT. She's got too many awards here for me to list because it would probably take all of our time. So you can talk to her about that over there, but please welcome her to the mic.
Thank you all for being here. I really am delighted and to be reading with my dear friend Sandra from college. So after hearing her mother's story and reading her book, I realized why we've been good friends for so long. There's a thread that you might see. Chapter 2. Oh, wait a second. Wrong start. This is from 1965. Mom and Dad went to report on the peaceful Selma to Montgomery March and the John F. Kennedy Space Center Gemini program launch. With a press pass, Dad joined his Catholic clergy friends to drop into Selma to draw the moments of history. Mom's empathy gave her the courage to go with him. On March 7th, 1965, the television penetrated into our home, showing the Edmund Pettus Bridge police massacre of a peaceful Southern protesters who wanted to vote. Police on horseback chased unarmed elderly women and children, beating them with bully clubs. They were there to terrify, but the clubs cracked skulls. We watched the protesters herded into a black enclave of 3 brick churches and a row of public housing. Dad heard the protesters escape into a church, only to have firecrackers thrown through the windows by police. An older woman who fell in the melee had a lighted cigarette burnt against her buttock. Children were left home alone while adults were hospitalized or jailed. Monday night, a young Unitarian Divinity student who was active in enabling black voter registration was cornered and beaten to death. Father Jack Egan made it clear that no clergy was to step outside alone and without their collar or habit intact. Within the circle of the Catholic clergy, Dad created a safe, protected corner to draw the civil rights movement, while Mom wrote her impressions. By Wednesday night, he was in a church jam-packed with civil rights characters and locals. They held hands in the cross-breasted custom with laborers who had broken hands and slinged arms to sing, "We shall overcome." At Holy Communion, Dad was moved by the protected white cleric with smooth and scholarly palms, connected to the brave working man who wore bib overalls and denim. Thursday and Saturday, the days blurred. Dr. King did not come until Monday or Tuesday, but everyone else was there, staying in houses and apartments, being fed by traumatized young teenagers whose parents and grandparents were hospitalized or jailed. There were many meetings for careful planning of the next march. Dad was fascinated with the intense basement planning, with crucifixes glinting at the end of rosaries. Archbishop Iakovos appeared on the altar platform of the church of one of the rallies of song and inspirational witness. The crossed arms were tricky for him, as he propped his archiepiscopal cross in a bobbing arrangement between his elbow, while swaying back and forth. Dad told me he was grinning as if no liturgy he had ever known was as wild and as much fun as this one. A beautiful sight in his tall crown and veil, and a worthy successor to the apostles. Sunday, Dad watched small groups that went out to attend services in local churches, but were blocked from entering. They knelt on the pavement outside for prayers. Dr. King came and inspired the clergy. Northern protesters, Southerns hoping for voting rights, children, grandparents, angels and archangels, and all the company of heaven. Dad joined the masses and gathered and sang, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory." He was careful to draw from a corner to not be noticed. At dinner, Dad told us about being on a bus full of singing and cheering demonstrators in Montgomery. Outside, a group of Southern white men carrying flames started to rock the bus. Dad stood up, raised his hand, and calmly reasoned with the Northern protesters to stop singing. They quieted. The rocking of the bus subsided. The perpetrators moved on, and the driver hurried away. "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespassed against us." Mom and Dad published an article about the Gemini program space launch that was testing two astronauts, Gus Grimson and John Young, as they orbited the Earth 3 times, tweaking their direction by firing thrusters and presenting the question if we could do that on Earth with the voting rights. My family was held tightly together by that strife that loomed outside our home walls. Thank you. A few years later, and still in the 60s, the times they are a-changing. This is chapter 2. A few weeks earlier, in another lively dinner table conversation, Dad quietly said, "Let's have a moment of peace. Om." We all surprisingly hummed, then laughed. He'd just come from Allen Ginsberg's peaceful protest in Lincoln Park with about 100 people. Somebody was there? It ended quietly, with police shouting through bullhorns as the park closed at 11 p.m., August 24th, 1965. The quiet Viet Cong of 1968. The quiet Viet Cong of North Vietnamese had launched the Tet Offensive, a coordinated attack on 36 South Vietnamese cities and a direct challenge to the American troops. For the U.S. forces, the price was maybe becoming too high to continue the war. The first protest on Friday included a black and white pig named Pegasus, the Immortal, advanced as a presidential candidate at the Civic Center. Jerry Rubin was arrested. Each night was progressively more violent. Protesters chanted, "The streets belong to the people," and revolt after police bludgeoned teens to the asphalt, clubbed photographers. Overworked police were fatigued, hungry, and thirsty. Monday, August 25th, the first day of the Democratic Convention, Chicago was prepped for battle. Wednesday, our family jumped into our Volkswagen for the Democratic Convention. I jammed in the third seat, fretting about my 6th grade homework. We couldn't get near the barricaded convention at the International Amphitheater, so Dad painted candidates as they spoke in the Conrad Hilton Hotel lobby. Mom taped interviews with people in the audience and hovered with the younger kids. The rest of us scattered. I saw a chimpanzee wearing a McCarthy straw hat and a tall man holding the chip's hand. The toe of my worn Keds tripped on a watch. I leaned to pick up the heavy silver band with a large ticking clock face. The chimp had already been escorted out. While I was walking down a long hallway looking for the lost and found, my brother came running. "Come on, we gotta go now," with unquestionable panic. I ran out into the crazy mixed-up street and jumped into the van side door with tear gas in the air. Close the windows! Dad maneuvered the van through the shouting, disordered, scrambled crowd. Turning west on Balboa, the '68 Battle of Michigan Avenue broke out, wide open. Mom hugged my brother in her lap. There was a chaotic buzzing with shouts, horses rearing on hind ends, thumping and stomping. We listened to the muddled radio broadcasts on the way home. Distressed commentators started to tell a confused story. Something else happened. As events rapidly unfolded, they told the next compelling story. Safe at home, we watched the hectic and unruly violence on TV. Police chased down teenagers, bashed them. Some fought back. The police kept clubbing the teens. The Chicago 7 defendants were all arrested. Rearranging snapdragons or reading poetic rhythms calmed me before the nightly dinner discussions. Unraveling Canterbury Tales gave me something to digest while 6 older teens, Frank, Andrew, Mary, Elizabeth, Patrick, and Hugh, sorted out their lives. Dinner table conversations revolved repeatedly about who got one of the 2 cars, menacing draft registrations, or conscientious objection to the war. I slipped snapdragons after squeezing a blossom into a vase, expecting a long-lost cousin who was coming for dinner. The doorbell rang. A golden sunset through September leaves streamed through the dark oak foyer. Kathleen had reddish, wavy hair, deep dimples of a familiar Roger smile, accompanying her charming entrance. We were introduced in the living room as Mom set down a tray of purpley grapes, candied pecans, cheeses, and Triscuits. After lemonade, mixed with a silver spoon, and cocktails in the living room, we walked through the dining room to the dimly lit screen porch. Handprints and castings hung on the stucco wall around a triple 8-paned window. Bees bounced against the north screen, drunk with cherry juice from the north woods. The lake on the east reflected the orange-red sky at dusk. Tart spiked chicken was served with crispy hashed potatoes and heaping salad bowl filled with carrots, iceberg lettuce, celery, and tomatoes, oil and vinegar, salt and pepper. Ice cream bowls waited on the sideboard buffet. Iced water, frothing milk, and white wine surrounded the snapdragon arrangement of mauve to purple tones in the Lazy Susan. Dad's wise and witty remarks were not part of the conversation yet. Quietly, patiently, he waited for the subject to catch his fancy. "Tell us about your work as a flight attendant, Kathleen," Mom said. "I've been part of the commercial MAC operation since '67. I've flown thousands of Vietnam-bound military men around the Pacific," Kathleen said. "My father didn't want me to fly military to the Pacific, so I didn't tell him. The Marines were a cross-section of America that all had the same haircuts. My older brothers served in the Pacific during World War II, and this was my chance. At times, you could hear a pin drop in the aisle, or pillow fights erupted on the flight. Part of the Marine Code was that everybody was a winner. They drilled that into our heads during the flights." Mom stopped eating, passing plates, and serving. Memories of flying with United Airlines in 1944 overwhelmed her. "When I was flying, I felt on the edge of my life," she said for the first time ever. "The closest I'd ever felt to being me while facing the fear of the unknown. I could feel the blood moving in my skin, my fingernails growing. My hair and face were full of electricity. I glowed silver. When I was flying, I was in control of myself, and I knew who I was." "I was 20 when I first started flying," Kathleen said. "My first Vietnam assignment was MAC, leaving Vietnam with a plane of tired, weary men who had just a few months before been boys. Within a month, my spirit was as old as water. They saw our round, not Asian eyes, and didn't say a word. They told us, the flight attendants, how it was with them. We didn't expect them to talk. We were proud of them. We were happy to welcome them to Honolulu or El Toro or Travis or some other base. We knew returning home would be tough for them. Nobody besides us really understood. The waiting was worse than the flights, Dad suddenly said. He had been stationed in Molesworth, England in 1945 between bombing missions over Germany. Imagination could be our undoing, so we kept ourselves occupied in London with theater, movies, and dinner. It lightened our load of worry, the echoes of memory. It lightened the load of what officers shouldered that others couldn't. I carried the soil from training in Texas and Arkansas, Glenview and Pennsylvania. The soil of England was still in the seams of my clothes when I parachuted from a burning plane into Germany. London dust was caked in the cuffs of my pants. We paused in silence with these revelations, knowing not to ask any more. Kathleen broke the silence. My airline scheduled a Christmas Eve flight between the Marine Corps from El Toro in California to Da Nang, base in Vietnam. That had not happened before. We said our goodbyes to the Marines in Honolulu and thought that they'd be gone. Cicadas hummed a beat, blue jays caused in the rising dusk. Forks and knives scraped the plates. She looked out the screens as if it was happening beyond the porch. There were the Marines the next day, she said. They were waiting to go to Okinawa with us. Like old friends, we sang Christmas carols and actually made gifts for each other, mostly poems. She paused. The 12-hour flight was filled with stories of the best Christmas was, or will be, with. We landed in Okinawa after all flights were canceled. Who knew why cancellations were made? We'd be leaving for Da Nang the next day with the same passengers at 11 p.m. Christmas Eve. The telephone rang several times. You have reached the McMahons. Please leave a message. Click. No one got up to answer it. 4 brothers were bracing for the impending draft, scrambling to find a way out. Patrick said quietly, "Is my college application essay going to be about learning or war? Learning seems another lifetime, another person. I'd be told to kill someone or be killed for my country, by our legal system, by my loyalty. My choice is to follow this order or give up my girlfriend, my home, my family, and go to Canada. What will my basketball team say? Am I a coward or a traitor? No one could order me to shoot another person. I could die. Could I become Canadian?" Patrick looked like his innards dropped or his stomach ached. "Maybe my birth date will be a high number." The flight from Okinawa to Da Nang is not that long, Kathleen said, but we made the best of every minute. We were so young and far from home, but good God, we were brave, and we did have Christmas. The crew had made this landing many times before. Everyone knew where they were going. We all saw red flares dotting the sky. Blasts of hot, humid air swallowed the coolness in the cabin. We all quieted on the final approach. A voice from the middle of the aircraft started to sing, "Silent Night." Softly, we all joined in until the plane landed and they opened the door. Maybe our flight would not make the best Christmas ever, but it's one that I will never forget. We looked at the crumbs on the plates as the cicada hum rose and fell with the crickets. Darkness descended. The glow from the dim lights cast shadows. The snapdragons smiled a darkening blue menace from their vase. They'd get me first. I couldn't pull the trigger. My skin pulsed tight, Andrew said. Leave my country forever, stay and be killed? What about allergies, hernias? Get a physical and find something wrong. This cannot happen, he said. The screen porch spun around. The windows vibrated like a breathing membrane. The separation from home began. The separation from trust of government, belief in school, religion, education, and sports dissolved. The only reality was to accept this luckless fate or run like heck. Mom ached, Dad went stone-faced. I tried to understand. Across the table and above the alert snapdragons, Frank squirmed in his seat, scared of his thoughts. "What is this war I oppose?" he said. "Shame, such shame. Hot, stupid shame. As long as I'm in college, I'll express my conscientious objection to war." Dad, who never talked about his service, recalled landing his 15th mission in England. The release from tension on returning from home base, he said. The intense pleasure of aliveness as the B-52 landed back in Molesworth. We defied the angel of death again. Triumph in life, the exultation of nearness to death brought everything more to life. The smell of grass mixed with burnt fuel, soil and singed rubber, asphalt and holly. You wanted to be all of the goodness and decency after that evil. To be for justice and courtesy, to be a good man. What is valuable became crystal clear. The sunset became worthy of study and capturing each and every streak in pink-lined gray cloud. You wanted to be what is best in the world. Dad said he was in a place he didn't belong that had become his reality. My parents were missing the war and flying. Dad said he couldn't tell his World War II story. It was beyond telling. There was no moral attached. There was no advice that comes from any episode. The thrill of life and death meeting couldn't be explained. The sensation of those flights was like trying to tell someone how chocolate tastes. No way to explain. The adrenaline from pushing beyond what is humanly possible was not fatherly advice. The same draft as 1942 was being reinstated next year, and 4 of his boys were of age. Mom had barely breathed since the beginning of Kathleen's story. The adrenaline rush of taking off became a necessity. Then, an unwanted craving, the intense glow of fuel and energy. I could have flown without the airplane. Mom told us of her propeller plane transports. It is the stitching together of tragedy and loss that remain and become part of us. The trauma barely happened, but it is the object in the room that entered our lives and wouldn't leave. None of us died, but a part of each of us did. Mom told of her intense migraines and the long-lost look in the returning military men's eyes. She poured chocolate sauce over vanilla ice cream for peanut-sprinkled sundaes, a maraschino cherry topped each, before being spun around on the Lazy Susan. The snapdragons glared a deeper purple above the disappearing bowls. Over the snapdragons, I could see my glum sister was missing her friends. She had another week of being grounded for her wearing pants to school, and she knew all her friends were together. "I can't see them because I'm wearing pants to school," Mary said. "We can't call on the phone. There are people dying of hunger in Africa while we are punished and suspended, grounded for what we wear." Hugh skidded his chair back and said, "Can I be excused? I've got wrestling practice." He stood up stiffly and walked away. A melancholy transitional air draped the conversation. The table of yearning yippies, transpiring through time to their own unique beginning. No one else noticed the increasingly louder crickets dominating the porch or the snapdragons going limp. Kathleen caught everyone's attention. "I recall a Texan becoming fast friends with a New Yorker," she said. "You couldn't get a word in between their stories. Neither listened. They both just talked. When the guys left the plane, I often stayed behind to sign paperwork for our cargo or fallen soldiers. I helped a Latino family walk from that chain link fence at Travis. At the aircraft, they received their son's coffin. I held the grandmother's fragile hand as the flag was placed on the coffin right before us. She was such a little woman. She wore a black mantilla. The massive red sunrise was orange and purple and seemed to hold us all in its brilliance. I looked straight into it as I placed my hand on the flag. We heaved great sobs. On my own, in a bus to San Francisco, I watched the sunrise disappear into the clouds. The scraping of plates softened as the night enveloped the tenderly lit faces reflecting each other. A human soul is a slight thing. Is it our duty to care for our body so the soul can progress? Are we stewards of that soul we carry so that it remains whole and healthy until life's end? Is our soul the same since the beginning of humankind? It is only a vague, slight notion of who we are and become in a lifetime. It is the only thing we are measured by in God's eyes. Thank you very much.